This is Roots. And sometimes a city teaches you that the world is much bigger than you first imagined. Not through travel, not through airports, but through an ordinary walk to work. When I moved to Pretoria, I learned the city on foot. I walked to work. I walked to museums. I walked to theaters. I walked because walking helped me understand a place. Looking at a map today, I realized how often my route followed what was then Baard Street, now Frances Baard. At the time, it was simply the road between where I lived and where I worked. Every morning, I passed embassies. Australia, India, Singapore, Rwanda, Angola, Syria, and so many others. Different flags, different gates, different worlds. At some point, I began to play a private game with myself. I would tell myself that I was visiting different countries on the way to work. One day India, another day Australia, the next Rwanda, without ever leaving Pretoria. The world seemed to pass beside me every morning. Who would have imagined then that years later Joy herself would visit Rwanda, a place I first encountered only through an embassy gate. Pretoria taught me that the world often arrives quietly, sometimes in books, sometimes through people, sometimes simply by paying attention. The city also told me its own language. Occasionally, I used taxis. On those rare occasions, I would politely ask the driver to stop before or after an intersection. The phrase I hadn't learned yet was, "Short left, driver." A lesson delivered in amusement, a reminder that every place has its own vocabulary. There was another question I heard more than once, a question that puzzled me every time. What are you? At first I wasn't sure what they meant. Then came the clarification. Xhosa, Zulu, Sotho, Tswana, what? What a strange question, or perhaps not. Perhaps people were simply trying to place me within a framework they understood. Even today, I'm not entirely sure how to answer. Family stories arrived in fragments. An Afrikaner oma, a Basotho opa, pieces of a story rather than a complete picture. The one person who could probably have answered most clearly is no longer here for me to ask. Perhaps some roots remain unfinished. I filled my free time exploring. I attended performances at the State Theatre, listened to chamber music at UNISA, visited museums, walked through places that connected me to South African history. I found myself tracing the footsteps of Sir Herbert Baker, the architect whose work stretches across South Africa and beyond. The Union Buildings, Pretoria Station, Rhodes Memorial, St. George's Cathedral, Wynberg Boys High, even the narrow fruit growers building. His influence reached as far as India. I became fascinated by the story of how one conversation, one connection can alter the shape of an entire landscape. The jacarandas became part of my daily life. Season after season, street after street, purple blossoms marking the passing of time. Summer storms arrived with dramatic certainty. Most people sheltered beneath trees. I often walked on. The city and I were still getting acquainted. Looking back now, I realize Pretoria was teaching me something important. Not about geography, not about architecture, not about history. It was teaching me how to notice stories hidden in buildings, to notice histories hidden in names, to notice the world passing quietly beside me. Those walks to work were never really about getting from one place to another. They were lessons in observation, lessons in curiosity, lessons in seeing. And perhaps that is why Roots exists at all. Because long before I picked up a camera, long before I became a tourist guide, long before I began telling stories professionally, I was already walking through cities asking questions, already looking more closely, already collecting stories. This is Roots, and sometimes the world arrives long before you ever leave home.